Good morning and welcome. More awful stories of MPs' expenses dodges today.
Would you like to have a look at the expenses of every single MP?
The expenses scandal just keeps on going.
An absolutely sensational story.
We knew instantly it was going to be almost like a demolition of Parliament.
This was the biggest political scandal since Profumo.
They're a disgrace.
We'd be crucified after his hand.
They tried to send the police round to shut us down.
It was wrong and we must accept that, and we've got to do something pretty quickly to sort it out.
Gordon Brown has pledged to crack down on ministers found to be abusing the expenses system.
These are just a few of the MPs hanging on by their fingertips.
Tonight, some face very awkward questions.
One of the problems with the system that we have had is that it appears to have allowed things like that to happen.
My name is Chris Evans and I'm the editor of The Telegraph. 10 years ago, back in 2009, I was head of news.
Robert Winnett, I'm the deputy editor here, and at the time I was the deputy political editor.
My name is William Lewis, and I was honoured to be the editor of the Daily Telegraph.
Christopher Hope, back in 2009, I was the Whitehall editor.
Matthew Bailey, at the time of MP's expenses, I was the news editor.
I just started the Telegraph, I was a reporter at the Telegraph. I'd been at the Sunday Times for 4 years before that. And I was about 3 or 4 weeks into being at the Telegraph.
It was only a year or so after the financial crisis, and I think, that has to be remembered as the context, because
we were in a recession, the economy was tanking.
It was just after the financial crisis had hit and people were beginning to digest the reality of what the collapse of Lehman's, Bear Stearns was going to mean for people around the world, but particularly in the UK.
Politically, we were in 2 years into Gordon Brown's premiership, and it wasn't going very well for him. The Tories were, under David Cameron, were mounting a pretty serious challenge to him in the polls.
There was a feeling of drift in the country, a lack of trust, certainly aimed at the financial system, of bankers not being punished for all of the chaos wrought.
Obviously, we were beginning to see the Gordon Brown premiership and the first wobbles. So it was into that kind of environment that the story began to hit.
the paper was under new ownership.
We were quite a new team. We had a young editor.
We had been through a really radical change program. We had tried to be the most forward-thinking, integrated newsroom there is out there.
We'd recruited some of the brightest and the best from across Fleet Street, and it was a good time to be involved in something like this. The untold story of MP's expenses is that quite a lot of people turned it down before we did it. And I was the head of news, and I was reading the papers every day, and I could see that these bits of MP's expenses were appearing in various places. And I was asking various people who worked for me, where do you think this is coming from, and why can't we have it?
We first got wind of the MP expenditure scandal really from the Freedom of Information Act, when some test requests went into Parliament to ask what were MPs claiming for.
But they should have given a huge amount of information quite quickly, because under FOI there's quite tight time limits to give the information, and the MPs, House of Commons, just wouldn't do that.
When the Freedom of Information Act was brought in 2005, one of the first things that everyone did at that time was to put in these requests to get details of MPs' expenses. So the Telegraph, the Sunday Times, independent campaigners like Heather Brooks had all been pushing very hard for several years to try and get this information.
I'm Heather Brooke. I did a lot of campaigning and reporting around the Freedom of Information Act, and I took the additional cost allowance case to the High Court for MPs' expenses. I was trying to look at the whole system in a holistic way, and so I saw these little stories coming out, like they would go after one person, it was a scandal, and then it would be brushed aside. And I was like, you just scratching the surface again. Like, the problem isn't like the bad apple, it's the whole pie, you know? It's rotten.
For several months, and indeed for several years, we knew that there was this great trove of expenses data out there. There was a few months where we suddenly started seeing quite a lot of information come out. There was stuff about Jackie Smith's husband.
The Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, was one of the first to face the scrutiny.
Media sources say she was not at home at the time. She lives with her husband, Richard Timney.
I am really sorry for any embarrassment I have caused Jackie.
And we were aware that there was probably someone out there who had this disc.
We knew that MP's expenses were going to be published because various people had been campaigning for their release and had fought various court battles. It later transpired that had the Telegraph not done its investigation, then most of the detail would never have emerged, because what the MPs were planning to do was to publish this stuff with all the salient details redacted, blacked out, so you couldn't really make sense of what was going on. And indeed, that's why this material was offered to us and to other papers, because the people involved in the redaction were so outraged that at what they could see was going on, but wouldn't be known because of the fact that it was being carefully excised.
A line manager gave us a basic outline that we were going to be dealing with a new process to do with MP's expenses, and that process was the redaction of certain information that we would be told to remove. Initially, what happens is a lot of information is presented on the screen in front of you, and it's receipts or letters from the fees office, whatever. And initially, you're not actually reading the content because you're concentrating on learning the process. Once you've cracked the process, by day 2 in the morning, then you're starting to take in some of the information. And the first inkling you get is when you hear just a sigh of in disbelief. People are just frustrated. Not angry to start with, because you don't actually comprehend just what it is that you're looking at until the penny drops. People were starting then to correlate between their own lives and an MP and what they were actually claiming for. The mood became, I would say, angry by second week. Then anger became, you could cut it some days with a knife, and just exasperation. A couple of guys were back from Afghanistan and were told us they were only working to earn money, to buy equipment. It's a fact that they don't have enough equipment, or the equipment might be inferior. They sign up to do a job, they understand that. They know they're going to take losses. They're members of the armed forces. That's what they sign up to do. They've no problem with that. But when you see your own MPs who have sent you to war, effectively what they call coining it, over and above what they should be getting, it's not the expenses that got them, it's the claims and what they were for that got them.
Our most energetic and tenacious reporter at the time was Robert Winnett. So I said to Rob, will you please go and find out who it is who's hawking this stuff around and ask them if we can have it. I also had a conversation with the then editor, Will Lewis, and said, I really think we should be going after this. And he was as keen as mustard.
I wanted to find out more. I was like, well, you got to keep going, guys. I mean, you have a sense of obligation.
We were totally mystified, and I was talking to all the people that I would normally talk to in and around Downing Street on the one hand, but they were equally mystified, and there were all sorts of rumours going around about, was there a whistleblower out there? Was there someone inside the fees office who was leaking this stuff? So it was just a case of picking up the phone and just sort of putting feelers out and saying, look, if this is out there, we're interested in just spreading the word that we were sort of in the market for this stuff if it was available.
I'd known Robert Winnett. We'd worked at the Sunday Times together, and I'd known that he was chasing the disc. I mean, it was kind of at the time, it was very much everybody wanted the MP's Expenses disc. So I knew Rob was after it, and I knew he was sort of having communications with people that might lead to it. And I was on holiday between my two jobs, and every so often I'd ring into Rob being like, if you get it, tell me. I'll happily work for free, even though my job hasn't started.
Someone had phoned Rosa Prince in the lobby when she was working one Sunday with some information about this.
A guy at the other end said, "Hello, would you be interested in looking at a disc of every single MP's expenses?" And I said, yes, I would.
And by pure coincidence, this was an American PR guy who I'd known 10, 15 years before, because he was a personal finance, public relations guy.
Rob, not so long afterwards, came back to me and said, "I think I know who is hawking this stuff around." And I said, "Great, let's organise a meeting. Let's get them in."
So I called him, and then I remember meeting him, I think in quite short order because of the calls that had been flying around, the next morning in a wine bar just off the Strand. He said he thought he knew someone who was involved in all this, who was a man called John Wick. And I think, again, within 24, 48 hours, I'd met John Wick, and I'd brought them both into the office to meet Chris Evans, who was then the head of news, and we began talking to them about how this might work.
John Wick. I run a risk management company based in the UK. I got involved with the MP's expenses because some people came to see me who had been working on the redaction of MP's expenses, were concerned as to what was going on and wanted to get it out into the public eye. They had tried once and it hadn't been successful. They thought that I might be able to advise them how to do it. We had a company we used for public relations guidance, and I talked to the MD of that and asked how I talked to the media.
The person we were talking to was a guy called John Wick, who has a military background, and he came to explain to us how the person who was providing him with this information were people who were in the room dealing with the redaction of information which was going to be released under the Freedom of Information Act.
We actually could see what was going to be removed, and in essence the public would never see what we'd seen, and that's the real frustration, because the detail is all in the unredacted, not the redacted.
These people had sat there day after day, week after week, becoming increasingly angry.
We're just normal people, and we pay every day out of our salaries to go to work, for our fuel, for our train. We pay for our lunch. We pay for everything out of our salaries, mortgages, everything. And now we're actually looking at a group of people that effectively we employ, and they're taking everything, and their wages just stay there.
Ordinary people have got to pay for everything out of their salary and wages.
Yeah, I thought when you worked and got a wage, that's what you paid everything for. That's what I've always done.
What you're doing is wrong, it's abuse. And why are you doing it? More to the point? Because you can. What kind of answer is that? I mean...
And I think it was that sense of anger that was relayed to him and said, look, this is a real scandal. We're not insiders in Westminster. We're just normal people who pay our taxes, and you just will not believe what is going on here, and someone needs to be told about this.
And so one Monday morning, he and I sat down with two gentlemen, one called John and another called Henry, and Rob and I tried to persuade them to let us see what they had. And they were in a slightly confused state because hitherto nobody had really expressed interest in what they had to say, what they had to offer. We were one of the first to have a website, The Telegraph. So I said to them, look, not only will we treat you fairly, we'll also treat the MPs fairly, and we'll publish all of it, every single MP's expenses.
There was a financial aspect to it as well. Chris Evans and myself had a discussion in which we said, look, well, the Telegraph don't pay for stories in this way. We're not a tabloid newspaper. It's not something we do. But, this is sensational. These people need some insurance that, they could lose their careers.
I remember very clearly Rob and I leaving that meeting, which was in a room just over there, and walking across to see the editor in his office, which was just over there. And I said to him, we're going to need to offer them some money. And we thought, what's the most we could possibly offer them? And we thought, well, maybe we can persuade the editor to offer them £30,000. So we walked into Will's office, and he just said, £100,000.
Honestly, the payment thing is a red herring, right? I mean, this is one of the most important bits of journalism, if not the most important bits of journalism in the post-war period. I can't think of a more impactful bit of journalism for Britain and British society, highlighting such profound wrongdoing and systematic abuse at the highest levels of government and parliament.
The next thing I remember was Rob actually bringing the disc into the office, and it was a Friday afternoon. It was a sunny Friday afternoon, and I was waiting for him to come in, and he had this brown envelope, and it wasn't a disc at all. It was a strange red plastic box.
We opened it up and we were just looking at it, and it sort of came up all these different files and everything, and we went straight for Gordon Brown, and we opened it up, and up came his I think the first thing we saw was his itemised phone bill, and Rob just went, "We're going to jail."
And we looked at it, and lo and behold, it seemed to have a lot of MPs' expenses on it.
Because we had one hard drive, and the next morning we knew that several journalists would all be starting to work on it, we had to copy it across. And so we got another hard drive and started the copying process across, and then realised it would take about 40 minutes to copy it across, so we went to Wagamama's for lunch in the interim and left it in the middle of the Telegraph office while it was copying across, which in hindsight seems complete madness.